The lecture hall buzzed with quiet conversations as students settled into their seats, notebooks open and laptops ready. Everyone knew that Professor Daniel Hart's classes were never ordinary. He had built a reputation over the years for presenting problems that challenged not only knowledge but also patience and creativity. Many students admired him, while others secretly dreaded the surprises he brought to every lecture. That morning he entered the room carrying a small wooden box with a polished brass lock. Without saying a word, he placed it gently on the front desk. The mysterious box immediately caught everyone's attention. Curious whispers spread across the room as students exchanged puzzled glances, wondering what was inside. Professor Hart looked around with a calm smile before speaking. "Inside this box is a cash prize of $10,000, he announced. "It belongs to the first person who can solve today's challenge." The room instantly fell silent. He turned toward the whiteboard and began writing a long series of equations, symbols, and logical conditions. At first glance, the problem seemed familiar, but as more lines filled the board, it became clear that this was unlike anything the class had seen before. Students leaned forward, reading each line carefully. Some began calculating immediately, while others stared at the board, trying to understand where to begin. Nearly an hour passed, pages filled with crossed-out calculations. Frustrated sighs echoed through the room as one student after another admitted defeat. Even the class's top performers could not make sense of the final step. Professor Hart glanced around the room and folded his arms. "I warned you," he said confidently. "Sometimes the right answer simply isn't within reach." Just as he reached for the eraser, the classroom door opened quietly. A man in his mid-30s stepped inside, breathing slightly harder than usual. His backpack looked worn, and traces of exhaustion showed on his face. It was Michael, a single father balancing night shifts, parenting, and university classes. Lowering his eyes respectfully, he apologized for arriving late before noticing the puzzle covering the board. A few students glanced back at Michael with sympathetic smiles, while others quietly shook their heads. They had been struggling with the puzzle for nearly an hour. If the brightest minds in the room couldn't solve it, what chance did someone who had just walked in have? Professor Hart checked the clock on the wall and sighed. "You're late, Michael," he said. "The challenge is almost over." "I understand, Professor," Michael replied politely. "I don't expect extra time. If it's all right, I'd just like to take a look." The professor hesitated for a moment before stepping aside. "You have 5 minutes." Michael thanked him and walked to the front of the classroom. Instead of grabbing the marker immediately, he stood quietly, reading every line on the board from top to bottom. He didn't rush. His eyes moved slowly across the equations, almost as if he were trying to understand the thinking behind the problem rather than forcing an answer. The room became unusually quiet. After a minute, Michael noticed something that everyone else had accepted without question. One assumption hidden in the problem seemed perfectly reasonable, yet nothing actually proved it had to be true. A memory suddenly came to him. The previous weekend, he had been helping his 8-year-old daughter finish a simple jigsaw puzzle. After struggling for several minutes, she had smiled and asked, "Dad, what if we've been starting from the wrong corner?" Her question had seemed innocent at the time, but it completely changed the way they solved the puzzle together. Standing in front of the whiteboard, Michael smiled to himself. He picked up the marker, erased a single line that every student had treated as correct, and began working from a different starting point. Step by step, the solution unfolded naturally. Every calculation connected smoothly to the next. Students leaned forward in disbelief. Professor Hart's confident expression slowly faded. He reread each step as Michael continued writing. When the final equation appeared on the board, the room was completely silent. No one spoke. Everyone was waiting for the professor to find a mistake, but none appeared. Professor Hart walked slowly toward the whiteboard, studying every line Michael had written. He checked the calculations once, then went back and checked them again. The confidence that usually showed on his face had been replaced by quiet concentration. The students watched closely, hardly daring to whisper. After several long moments, the professor lowered the marker he was holding and looked directly at Michael. "I can't find a single error," he said quietly. "Your solution is correct." For a second, the room remained silent as everyone tried to process what they had just heard. Then the silence broke into loud applause. Some students smiled in amazement, while others laughed in disbelief. A few who had spent nearly an hour wrestling with the puzzle shook Michael's hand as he returned to his seat. Professor Hart picked up the small wooden box from his desk and unlocked it with a brass key. Inside lay a neatly arranged bundle containing the promised prize money. Without hesitation, he handed it to Michael. "You've earned it," he said. Michael accepted the box carefully, his hands trembling slightly. He wasn't thinking about the money itself. His mind immediately went to his daughter and the overdue bills waiting at home. The prize meant school supplies, groceries, and a little breathing room after months of working long nights and studying during the day. One of the students raised a hand. "Michael," she asked, "how did you solve something that none of us could?" Michael smiled gently before answering. "I don't think I solved it because I know more than anyone here," he said. "Life has taught me to keep looking when the first answer doesn't work. Being a parent means solving new problems every day. You learn that giving up isn't really an option, especially when someone depends on you." His words filled the room with thoughtful silence. Professor Hart nodded slowly. For years, he had believed intelligence was measured by speed and academic achievement. Watching Michael that day reminded him that determination, patience, and real-life experience could reveal answers that knowledge alone sometimes missed. The applause slowly faded, but the atmosphere in the classroom had completely changed. The students were no longer thinking about the puzzle or the prize money. They were thinking about the lesson they had witnessed without expecting it. Professor Hart stood quietly for a moment before turning to face the class. "I've spent many years teaching students how to solve difficult problems," he said. "But today, one of my students reminded me that wisdom doesn't always come from books." He looked at Michael with genuine respect. "I judged your chances the moment you walked through that door," he admitted. "I saw someone who was late and assumed you had already missed your opportunity. I was wrong, and I'm grateful you proved it." The room grew silent again. It wasn't the silence of confusion this time. It was the silence that comes when people recognize an important truth. Michael smiled modestly and shook his head. "We all make quick judgments sometimes," he replied. "What matters is whether we're willing to change our minds when we learn something new." Several students nodded in agreement. As class ended, many gathered around Michael to congratulate him. Instead of asking about the money, they wanted to know how he stayed motivated while raising a daughter, working night shifts, and studying at the university. Michael answered each question with patience. "My daughter is the reason I keep going," he said. "Whenever I feel like quitting, I remember that she's watching how I face life's challenges. I want her to grow up believing that hard work and kindness matter more than making excuses." That evening, Michael walked home carrying the wooden box. He knew the prize would ease many financial worries, but the greatest reward wasn't the money. It was the confidence that difficult circumstances didn't define his future. The students left campus with more than a solved puzzle. They carried a lesson they would remember long after graduation. Never underestimate someone because of their appearance, their age, or the struggles they carry. True strength often belongs to those who quietly refuse to give up.